Many students fail English paper 3 because they do not read the text properly. You need to spend at least 5 to 10 minutes every day reading a set book. And you can't read the whole book within that short time, but you can read some parts of the book within that time. You have to divide the book into manageable episodes and just read them. Then you can group the episodes so that you read related episodes at the same time. You can either track a certain event. For example, in the Samaritan, you can just track Nicole's arrest, or you can track a certain character. For example, you can read about, say, Mosi, or you can read about Comrade Melusi in Fathers of Nations. Look at Nicole's arrest. We look at it from the point of view of the actual arrest. Then we have the planning or the thought or the motive. And then we have the aftermath. Now, the planning happens on page 47. Then the actual episode where she's arrested is page 93 to page 98. And then Bembe also talks to the judge, Ian Jeden, about it on page 103. But before we even get to page 103, he talks about it to Mayor Mosi, the aftermath, the failed attempt to have Nicole arrested on page 100. And then Ramdai talks about it on page 125. We also see Inspector Bembe apologizing to Nicole on page 131 concerning the arrest. Now, a student can understand Nicole's arrest better if she reads this act in one sitting or around the same time. If you have 10 minutes a day, you can read a bit today and a bit the next day until you're done with that particular episode. And then, like in Fathers of Nations, if you're trying to understand the story of Comrade Melusi, you'll have to track the pages where Comrade Melusi is mentioned, and you look at his actions, you look at his words, and you look at the outcomes of these actions and words. What he says, what he does, and what happens as a result of that. If we study the story of Comrade Melusi in Fathers of Nations, we first meet him on page 1. The full story of Comrade Melusi is on page 82 to 99. Page 82 to 85 is the security screening at the summit. We've gone ahead of time, ahead of the plot. Then we are taken back to when he meets Tad Longway in Chimanuka restaurant, and he talks about a myriad of things. He talks about many things. And we also see him on page 103, where we see he has a grudge or bitterness against the Boma, or the ruler of Zimbabwe, who caused him many problems. And then we also see him on page 143 to 144, looking at a photograph of his late wife and planning to avenge her death. Then he executes it on page 155 to 156 when he tries to attack the Boma. And then we also meet him, or we hear about him on page 174, that when the others came back to the summit, he was nowhere to be seen. And lastly, page 182, where he was part of the celebrations after Path Alpha 1, but in absentia. That is how you track a character. A student has to really get the details. Well, when you look at page 85, Zimbabwe is fighting for independence. They're fighting Smith. And then they attain independence. After defeating Smith and attaining independence, the next order of business was to form a transitional government, which was headed by the leader of Melusi's group, and this person is Andebele. Don't confuse him with the Boma, who is the ruler of Zimbabwe, and that is a Shona. Then Melusi is snubbed as minister. He is not made minister. That is page 87 to 88. Then the leader of Melusi's group, the Ndebele, is sacked on page 88. That leads to an eruption of anti-government unrest. And then the government reacts by releasing the Gukurahundi, and Ziliza is killed on page 90 to 91. Then the new ruler has a newfound hatred for the Ndebele because he is Shona. And then Comrade Melusi forms his party, the NIP. And there is a disjointed opposition that tries to unseat the ruler of Zimbabwe. After that, we also told about the SAP program, the Structural Adjustment Program, that was trying to work on the economy, but it didn't work. It wanted to revive Zimbabwe's economy by restructuring it, but it did not succeed. And then Melusi now relocates to the slums because he couldn't really afford rent in the posh area that he used to live before. And then we have the Murambatsivina coming to the slums and clearing the slums, and the urban poor are displaced because of supporting the opposition. And then that is when Comrade Melusi joins AGDA. Well, a student has to really understand the story of Melusi and read the various episodes. Just 5 to 10 minutes a day would suffice. When you look at the question that was tested in KCSE 2024, the success of any new idea aimed at bringing positive change in the society depends a lot on determination. Using Teacher Nicole, students had to write that essay basing the illustrations on Teacher Nicole. A student that tracked the story of Teacher Nicole knew her actions and her outcomes and how she related with other characters performed better. Look at the other question that was tested in 2025. Professor Kimani's challenges are evidence of how failed leadership affects or negatively or affects citizens. Well, those two questions were based on a particular character. If you are a candidate preparing for KCSE this year, it is important to know that a question can be tied to just one character, like Mosi or Bembe, Ian Jaden, or even Nicole. If you are in Form 3, again for Paper 3, a question can be tied to just one character, like Kimani or Melusi or Tahir, or any other character like Tad Longway. So as you study, ensure that you track those characters, know all their actions and the outcomes of these actions, and any lessons that you learn from what they do, what they say, and the outcome of those words and actions. Follow Wafula Wekati for more tips in English Paper 3, compositions, and even pronunciation tips.